Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Manulife Business Success Series webinar. It's called Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace. My name is Ian McLean, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on the foundation of mutual understanding and respect. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors and partners. So a special thank you to our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife. And our platinum sponsor for the series is the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. I'd now like to welcome Bianca Moldovan, Corporate Social Responsibility Manager with Manulife, to say a few words. Bianca.
Thank you, Ian. On behalf of Manulife, we're very proud to sponsor the Business Success Series, and thank you everyone for joining us today. A very important discussion around diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Karen from Manulife will speak in more detail to this. However, I did want to note an important commitment that Manulife has made in terms of our own organization, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You may have heard, however, Manulife has made a commitment really rooted in 3 pillars to increase the representation of diverse talent at all levels in the organization, to create inclusion across the company through enhanced training, and to support organizations helping Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. So really a 2-year plan that focuses on employment opportunities, training, and community support that we're really proud to put into action. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ian, for more insight from our panel.
Well, thank you, Bianca, and we are thrilled to have Manulife on board for this series as we work to support local businesses during this very difficult time. Just before this session formally gets underway, I'd like to take just a few minutes for a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce any background noise. If you have any questions that come up through the session, you can type them into the question box in your control panel at any time. If you have a tech-related issue, a representative of our team will get right back to you. If there's questions for today's presenters, they will be gathered throughout the session, and our speakers will do their best to answer as many questions as is possible following the presentation. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will be also made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. The last several months have highlighted that systemic racism and discrimination exists in our communities. To build on our commitment of diversity and inclusion, we have formed a committee to listen, learn, and provide advice to the Chamber members moving forward. We want to ensure diversity and inclusion is present in all aspects of our work, communication, processes, and events. We believe that a diverse and inclusive Chamber community is fundamental, and we are committed to do better and create change. As we continue to plan this series, we will be exploring topics covering all aspects of diversity and inclusion, including Indigenous relations, LGBTQ issues, and accessibility inclusion. I want this to be a safe place to have honest discussions. I'm now pleased to welcome Carl Cadogan, good friend of the Chamber, who will be moderating today's discussion. Carl is currently the CEO of Reception House Waterloo Region, an organization that welcomes and serves government-assisted refugees in the Kitchener-Waterloo region. Carl has a strong multidisciplinary background obtained in in senior roles in the not-for-profit sector and within government. His career spans several areas of professional practice, including community development, human resources, immigrant services, fundraising, and government relations. He has written and spoken extensively about diversity issues and has served as chair of the London Diversity and Race Relations Advisory Committee, the Metro Toronto Task Force on Race Relations and Policing, and many other similar organizations and activities. So we're very pleased to have Carl join us and lead this discussion today. Please join me in welcoming Carl.
Thank you very much, Ian. And I just want to welcome everyone. This is the first of a series of webinars that we hope that you will attend. We hope that you view this discussion and these presentations as a safe place to express your opinions and to learn and to share. The committee that was formed in August is a group of individuals who are chamber members and are very excited about the steps that the chamber is willing to take and is going to take over the next little while. This is not an easy topic. It raises many issues and thinking for people, but that is really the critical area that a webinar like this really hopes to promote, is to get people thinking about this issue, to get people working on action so that we have a community and a society that is really free of these racial and diversity issues that currently exist. We have a panel, and you will see, folks, I'll give you a brief introduction to the panelists. We have Colleen James, who is passionate about helping each other. She's a professor at Conestoga College in the School of Business. She has more than 15 years of experience promoting inclusive environments in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Colleen has balanced her passion and education and diversity understanding to provide training to organizations. In 2015, she started her consulting practice, Divanify Inc., and really focused on local equity, inclusion, and diversity issues. The next person I would introduce you to is, I have some notes here, Karen Kazumovic. Karen is a senior leader and lawyer with over 18 years of experience transforming large private and public sector organizations in the areas of diversity, inclusion, human rights, and accessibility. As Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Manulife, Karen is responsible for driving leadership accountability and developing Manulife Global's diversity and inclusion vision, strategy, and programs. Prior to Manulife, Karen championed change by creating the Toronto Transit Commission's first enterprise-wide diversity and inclusion strategy, and led human rights compliance and risk management activities at TTC and the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Karen began her career as a litigation lawyer at Macmillan LLP, where she also managed the firm's diversity outreach and talent management programs. And Alicia Moshe. Alicia is a good friend of mine and from London, Ontario, and she's a driven business strategist, diversity and inclusion champion. She's an entrepreneur and thought leader with a background in corporate sales and leadership. She holds an MBA in administration with specialization in sustainable commerce, as she remains committed to embedding social responsibility practices within corporate infrastructure. She's a passionate community activist. She's a host and executive producer of Melted View talk show centered on intersectionality of the Black Canadian experience, having cultivated over 15 years of experience inspiring tangible change in the advancement of equality and equity measures to promote the inclusion and diversity within the communities in which she serves. You have three very talented and committed individuals, and we are going to start by me asking sort of the first question, and maybe of Ali, how does your organization speak to or inform your staff on the issues of diversity and inclusion?
Thank you, Carl, for having us and for the robust introductions. I'm honored to be part of this panel because, to your point, such a wealth of experience for my peers on the panel as well, and I'm excited to learn from them. And I think this is a really great first question to start, because what you highlighted at the top of this is just the vulnerability in this conversation in itself. And that's really how, when I think about my organization and TD Canada Trust, that's how we've approached it, is recognizing the uncomfortable conversations that need to be had and creating space and opportunity for those dialogues. So when we really lean into how can we support our colleagues, how can we support our customers, this is the fundamental grounding piece in how we hinge all of our conversations, to really drive meaningful conversations, to sit in that place of discomfort and say, yes, let's acknowledge if there's opportunities for us to drive systemic change. Let's deploy the voices that matter and create space for voices of melanated views or experiences, and show that diversification of thought within the organization instead of shying away. And that's really one of the key pieces that I've seen my organization stand tall in committing to this work, is not shying away from the uncomfortable. And that's what we would certainly, again, probably one of the resounding themes that you'll hear from the three of us today is leaning into those spaces and sitting in those spaces and knowing that you don't need to have the answers. I've seen many of our leaders do that over the past, 8, 9, 10 months, especially with the resurgence of Black Lives Matter and all of the other challenges that we've experienced in 2020. Really challenging for our colleagues as we think about a majority of our workforce moving into a work from home state. Everyone is having all of these different complexities within their personal lives. And how do we ensure as an organization, these employees, our colleagues, can bring their best selves to work? And that's fundamentally through dialogue. So when I think about what's changed over the course of the last year, although we've always remained a committed leader in this space, we've now seen leaders stand tall, show their discomfort, show their vulnerability, identify where they sit from an unconscious bias perspective, and commit to doing the work, but creating that door of transparency to say, here's where I am and that I don't know the answers, and being okay with that, but working through it collectively as an organization. So I think it's a great first question.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ali. I think in your answer, you reference this 2020 has been a year of total disruption. I think beyond COVID-19, we've had racial and political and we had disruptions at every level. I guess my second question would be maybe to Karen. Has the many examples of racial issues that has happened in 2020 changed the way your organization views the issue of diversity and inclusion? I think Ali spoke a little bit about what TD Canada Trust is doing. What about Manulife?
Yeah, so thanks, Carl, and also such an honor and pleasure to be speaking with you all today and collaborating with Ali and Pauline and Carl. I think we have seen a much greater focus on BIPOC inclusion this year, so inclusion of Black, Indigenous, and persons of color. I think the eyes of the world have finally opened, and at Manulife and in society, we've just seen a much greater commitment to change and momentum for change. People are no longer satisfied with just talking about issues and diversity and inclusion. We're being held to a greater account for actions and change. So I think similar to TD, one of the biggest changes that we've seen is open conversations about race and racism and systemic racism. I think in the past, these were very sensitive topics. These were scary topics for people to discuss openly. And I think at Manulife, we're just seeing much more people reaching out, a lot more managers and leaders reaching out to say, how do we have these conversations? Like, where do we begin? How do we talk about race? And I think it's not like a muscle that we're used to using, and people, there's a lot of fear. People are afraid of making mistakes, saying the wrong thing, using incorrect terminology, hurting or offending someone. So I'd agree with Ali. It's okay to be uncomfortable and to talk about our discomfort and to have questions. And at Manulife, we launched an initiative this year that we called Courageous Conversations, just to kind of take away some of that fear, because it does take courage to talk about these issues. And I think it's important not to put too much pressure on ourselves to be perfect, because I think that's where a lot of the fear comes from, and we will make mistakes, we will get things wrong, but we have a responsibility to try. And I think it takes risk to grow and learn, and we've seen a much greater likelihood and incidence of people reaching in and leaning in to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Colleen, you come at this from a little bit different perspective. You are a consultant. You are being engaged by small and larger organizations to help them through this struggle that they're going through. I have a question that maybe as a consultant you can kind of reflect on, and it also has to do with kind of my role as chair of this committee for the chamber. What do you think? What can the chamber and chamber members do to support Black-owned businesses of people of color?
Okay. So again,
if you had to advise the chamber, give them some free advice, what would you give them?
Nothing's for free. No. So thank you for having us here and part of this conversation. And as Alicia and Karen said, conversations they're the catalyst for change and for creating authentic, actionable, tangible change within organizations and within individuals as as an individual. So the one thing that I need to make sure is clear is that when we think about BIPOC business, it's not a one size fits all. So the individual needs of a business are, it's specific to that business and that organization. And, for the chamber, it's going out and really making those connections, building those relationships with the businesses that typically you have not heard from before. And, when we think about how does this look, and, perhaps it's that outreach component, because there's a lot of assumptions that are made with this, within this work and within EDI work that, they're going to come to us, right? And that's just not the case, because for so long, and history has shown this, when you've been left out of the equation, out of the conversation, there's no incentive for a BIPOC-owned business to reach out and say, we want to be a part of that. So a lot of this is intent and being purposeful about reaching out and, acknowledging that, there's work to do. We acknowledge that, we haven't done the amount of outreach that's needed to engage with these racialized owned businesses and building the relationships. And there are, I always say this, there's small, tangible things that can be done that help with creating impact. When I think about, how do you apply to be a member of the chamber? Is there something identified that indicates that I'm an owner of a racialized business, right? And that's how you start collecting your data. And then when you have your membership directories, is there something that indicates that yes, this is a BIPOC-owned business, right? So for your business and your chamber members who might want to reach out, collaborate, connect with, understand, there's an identifier that says, okay, and then you have a numbers perspective. When we look at the data, there's something there, tangible, simple. It's and that's a simple update to a form, essentially, right? That can help you. Another avenue that I think about is the education piece, right? We've had so much education from businesses about COVID-19, how to navigate this, opportunities to access, is it funds, is it, support? But there's a whole equity piece that hasn't even been addressed, right? And that has come out of, COVID, which has affected everybody. So and those are small, tangible things, and education is key. And I know there's, an education component to the chamber, but is there an equity piece that's pointed right out there? The other thing, with some of the work that I do, especially with businesses and helping them understand, is that, a business is essentially a microcosm of the communities that it serves. So it should be reflective of the communities it serves. And if that is not displayed within the employee from all levels. I know as Karen and Alicia said, throughout all levels, we have to ask ourselves why and then the how. So I get those same questions as well. How do we start? And this is a journey. This isn't something that you can't undo 400 years in 6 months or one workshop, right? It's a journey, and you have to know that there's a process, and the low-hanging fruit, the little things you can do, help within the greater objective and outcome of obtaining equity. And sometimes when we look at equity, and it's been said by many consultants as well that sometimes you have to create balance, and by creating balance, that means you're being specific and intentful in reaching out to those communities who typically you've never heard from before, and maybe amplifying them a little bit more to make sure that you're exposing them and helping them as well to achieve success in their business.
Great, thank you. This is a question that perhaps is best for, I guess, for either Ali and or Karen. And you have both been doing your jobs in the diversity area for a while, and you've had experience. You've probably seen really your organizations struggling. And so I guess this question is, how are you in your role at Manulife or TD Bank achieving the diversity that the bank or the institution wants to achieve? Like, what strategies are in place, not to level the playing field, but to sort of demonstrate to those people who are looking that something is happening? You want to take it, Ali?
No, I was gonna say happy to tag team, and I'll hand it over to Karen, because I bet you there'll be a lot of similarities in both of our approaches, being one of the strong corporate leaders in this market. Both of our industries really look to kind of match each other as far as what we're doing for our colleagues and our customers. So I'll start by saying it's really, Colleen hit the nail on the head, is that this isn't a change that you do one course, you create a little bit of awareness, and then fundamentally, we're going to move, in my case, 90,000 colleagues to think or act differently, and all the leaders within, right? It's really, again, creating that level of importance from the top down and from the bottom up, and showing that you can have inclusion within the workplace, and again, acknowledging when there isn't, and really spending time in those spaces. So similar to what Bianca shared at the top of the call, is creating those public commitments, being transparent. So TD's done the same thing in the market, and making public commitments on what they're going to do as far as internally to create work, to align to the right work that needs to be done around creating the right representation, having that diversity of thought across all of the leadership tables to make sure that there is that uniqueness in that brand, backed by, again, the commitment to community. So we've always been very big in marrying our corporate structures. We've had a long-standing relationship with diversity and inclusion built within our HR framework. We have that built within our corporate citizenship platform. But then again, it's marrying it, like where you see the fundamental changes in 2020 is marrying that across the broader organization, deploying all of your human resource groups and your business-led resource groups around a shared vision. And that's where I really look, and I'm so inspired by our CEO and leader, Barrett Mizrani, is really around that commitment to, here is the brand, here's something that we can all, again, align to as a vision of who we want to be as an organization. And then, as Colleen said earlier, you just start. And it's simple things, looking for those low-hanging fruit opportunities, looking at, your hiring panels, how you approach talent and acquisition. So again, Karen and I, coming from a broad corporation where we have robust HR teams who are built to live in these spaces, but making sure that representation is across the board, and looking at every single aspect of your end-to-end chain on your value proposition on where can we be adding a diversity and inclusion lens, and where are we doing well today, and how do we take from those learnings. So applying that thought as you approach your business strategy, as you go into 2021, recognizing that it's probably going to still be a very ambiguous state with the way society is placed in and everyone's impact to COVID, thinking about, not that you need to throw your business plan out. That's not what any of us are saying. It's saying, how can I lean into my business plan? look for opportunities to start small, bringing in experts to sit in that discomfort to say, you know what, we may not know, we may be doing things well, but let's bring in an expert. Let's kind of open up the doors and say, where are there opportunities for growth, and heed feedback from businesses like Colleen's to say, where can we do better, and be okay to ask, right? And I think that's the main dialogue when we think about, you know, the BIPOC experience, when we think about how we approach, you know, individuals in the Black community, and just being an ally. And a lot of that knee-jerk reaction is to just ask those questions, which is tremendous. But also, I think the fundamental piece, as we've kind of shifted through the last 8 months, is deploying your resources of what you can do with yourself. I think fundamentally across the industry, there's so many resources now, so many brilliant books that you can do the individual work, and starting with yourself to acknowledge where, you know, what are those unconscious bias, because we all have them, whether you know, are a minority, a visible minority, whether, you know, you ascribe to any sort of segmented pocket or group, whether, you know, you live in an aspiration of the presumption of white privilege, everyone has some form of an unconscious bias. It's acknowledging them and then taking those learnings and moving them forward. So I think those are the fundamental pieces where, when I think about my role and what the job I need to do is inspire change and consult and inspire our leaders to say, you're doing great. There's opportunities and you're doing great. And I say that because you're asking the right questions. You're putting yourself out there to ask. And that is the fundamental piece that anyone can ask for, especially your colleagues. And when you think about your smaller organizations that would be part of this Chamber of Commerce, it's just starting small, asking the questions, being inquisitive, being curious. And that is how you can kind of elevate yourself to be great and grow on that journey, because it will take time. No movement has happened overnight. It will take time, but it's being the right type of ally to continuously, as things start to fizzle out, which anything in society does, you know, whether it's the new iPhone of the world or whatever, your job when it comes to diversity and inclusion is to keep the conversation alive and to bring it constantly back to light as you're making big strategic business decisions, to keep that on the forefront, especially when it's not, you know, on the top media topic on our social media or our news outlets, right? It's your job to be that champion, and that's the hat you wear.
Absolutely. I just want to jump in quickly.
Oh yes, go ahead.
Just want to jump in quickly, because the other caveat of this is, again, you know, that accountability piece, and that, you know, leadership, management, entire companies now are going to be held accountable. So whatever the commitment is, whatever that initiative is, know that they're going to be held accountable, and they're able to check in and say, this is where we're at, right? Because the worst thing for any racialized group is when there's silence. Like we've said we're going to do something, and then all of a sudden we don't hear at all what, you know. So it's okay if you don't have the perfect solution, but at least to keep checking in, keep making sure, have those conversations. Yeah.
That is huge. And that's, I mean, like when you think about just the public commitments that both of our industries have made, you need to be prepared, even again on a smaller scale, as an entrepreneur. Any commitments you make, whether publicly, and to your point, Colleen, or privately with your employee base, you need to circle back. You need to show that journey of work in order to create that level of trust and create that safe space, because your customers will be looking for you to be digging into this space, as well as your colleagues. And that's really, again, how you cultivate that diversity within your brand.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Karen, do you want to give that question a shot?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I mean, Colleen and Alicia did a great job, but you know, I think having a good strategy is really key to doing this work, because there's no shortage of programs that you can put into place or diversity and inclusion best practices. So I think a good strategy will ground your work. And if you have any workplace data, if you have data about the representation breakdown of your employees, or if you run an employee engagement survey and you can put diversity questions in there to see the extent to which your workplace is diverse and inclusive, and diverse employees are engaged, to ground your strategy in that data and to select actions that will help close whatever gaps you have in your workplace is really key. And like Alicia said, like having that data, doing continuous monitoring and adjustments to adjust your D&I programming is really important. Communicating when you've had wins and being transparent when you haven't been able to move the dial. At Manulife, we set KPIs, key performance indicators. We set goals for what we're trying to achieve, and we're transparent and becoming more and more transparent about when we're achieving those goals and when we're not. And that helps us drive more accountability for change. So I think there are some important foundational elements that you want to put in place. You want to look at your recruitment initiatives. You want to have education, awareness raising initiatives. And, you can get diverse employees in the door, but if you don't have good development, advancement, engagement, and retention strategies, your diverse employees are going to leave just as soon as they're joining the organization because they won't feel like they're included and valued and like they belong. So it's important to kind of look at the entire employee life cycle and put really good strategies in place.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. So both you and Alicia come from, two of Canada's largest institutions. And I think you've got the resources to make things happen within your organizations. What are some strategies that you think small employers might use to get where you guys are going or get where you guys have landed? Start with you, Karen.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to take that. We, having worked at the Toronto Transit Commission, which is, a public entity, budgets, are not as big as in the private world. So, I'm used to doing this programming with, a smaller budget. And as a small employer with limited resources and maybe not a dedicated D&I resource, there are easy to implement, budget-friendly steps you can take. So, I'll start with training. There is so much free content out there. I think that the training content has blown up with D&I work. So there's a lot you can leverage. I mean, I come from the legal industry originally, and I'm on a lot of mailing lists, electronic mailing lists for large law firms, and they push out a lot of free content, panels, education training. So, you can sign up for industry mailing lists, and likely there will be free D&I content. LinkedIn actually has some really good free diversity courses. I think they're free until the end of 2020. And you can join, there are organizations out there, Canadian organizations that may charge a membership fee, but then once you pay that membership fee, there's a flat rate, and they have free research and webinars and conferences. And one that we belong to is CCDI, Canadian Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, that has a lot of great content for organizations that are just getting started. Aside from training and education raising, I would say a budget-friendly way to do this work is to look at process changes, because process changes don't cost you anything to do. If you're thinking about your hiring practices and you want to try to eliminate and reduce unconscious bias in your hiring practices, you could do things like standardize your process. So develop interview questions in advance, ask the same questions for all candidates, so there's a level playing field. You can ensure that you have interview panels, and most importantly, diverse interview panels. So you have a panel of 3 or 4 people interviewing candidates, so you have thought leadership around the table, and there's less likely a chance for unconscious bias to seep in when you're making hiring decisions. You can blind resumes, so remove identifying factors like name and address, so that you're evaluating candidates on their accomplishments and unconscious biases aren't getting in the way. And really, I think one of my most important pieces of advice is really leverage your employee base, because whether you're a small employer or medium-sized employer, people want to help with this work. It just takes a bit of organizing, helping to organize them into a committee or a small employee resource group. And you can really leverage and channel that energy and enthusiasm. And, employees can be a great two-way listening channel, so they can give you feedback on what's really happening in the workplace, what employees want to see. But if you have diverse employees that you can reach out to, you can get input, when you're designing new products for customers, or, when you're thinking about marketing to your customer base. Really leveraging people who may not normally be on those teams, so that you get more diversity of thought, and you're putting more of a broader lens on your product offerings and the way you do business and your day-to-day decision making, I think is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Colleen, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I agree with much of what Karen was saying. I also think that for small businesses that are starting out, and resources are limited, but kind of reframing that model of how we attract clients, which involves again building those relationships, networking, and thinking of kind of that universal design for your business in terms of where's my gap, and who am I not seeing coming through the door, who am I not seeing ordering online. And with any small business growing, we start with a little bit of affinity bias. We go to who we know to help promote, and generally those are people who are within our circles, and we don't take that little bit of time to reach out to other networks, right? And I really think like this is an area that the chamber can really leverage to create those relationships and help bring together the businesses that are just starting out, that represent racialized groups, every group within the community. But there's an opportunity to leverage the chamber and the resources that are there as well. And again, that educating yourself, right? Lots of free access to information, and that will help you learn. And the thing with the work and doing this work is everyone starts at a different level. So we can't assume that people know more than they do. And we have to look inward for that, right? So the questions that are going to start off our critical thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion really start with where you are at, and you starting that journey. And then when you get to the point where I need to kind of bounce stuff off, that's when you kind of reach out, go to, your networks, but also avenues like the chamber to help with addressing equity and diversity.
Thank you, Colleen. Any words on this topic before I get to another question, Alicia?
Yeah, I'm completely on side with both what Colleen and Karen said. The only piece I would add and just amplify is that it's really not treating this as a separate kind of line on your balance book. Like, it's really embedding this as part of your framework. But yeah. I think, I'm so glad that you elevated that piece too, because Karen really talked about, the front end approach, like how you, assume talent. And then Colleen chatted about, how can you take these measurable actions and understand where you're at? And I think, again, that's to me one of the key pieces, because before you kind of bring anyone new in, you need to understand and do that work and assess your own comfort level. And again, depending on the size and scale of your business, you may have 5 employees, you may have 50, or you may be, part of a mass corporation like Karen and myself. And it's really around understanding the knowledge of, the business that you are running, understanding where are our gaps, deploying their resources internally to close those gaps, checking back in, creating that urgency and that importance and that scalability within your organization. And to the example that Colleen gave earlier, like for the chamber, right? There's simple things when you look at your processes that Karen was saying, and looking at how can I cultivate clean data, clean insights to really ground myself in where am I today against, you know, the others in industry who may be my competitors. Where are they? Understanding the market that you play to really ground yourself in the fact of how am I communicating with my customers? Understanding how do my customers perceive my brand? And that's where you're going to start to immediately, once you start digging in and opening that door, the work and the amount of opportunity that you will have will become very readily apparent. And then what we've said, you know, the theme that you've heard through the call is don't shy away from that work. Now that your customers have told you, you've created that open level of discussion within your employee base, because they are the most brilliant sounding board. If you create a space where they know that their opinions will be valued, they will tell you what they're missing and what they need to stay and to grow and to amplify your organization and vision. But once they give you that, both your customers and colleagues, you have to again, from an accounting perspective, do something with it. And again, rank your knowledge. If you don't know, depending on the scale of your business, that's where there's so many resources, whether it be within this collective circle in the chamber or externally, that's where, again, you have the opportunity to stand tall. So I am completely on side with kind of the narrative that we're sharing and hoping that these are tangible action items that you could do. They're not big dollar things. They're little small nips and tucks that you can start leaning into today.
The other thing, when I look at some of the bigger corporations I've worked with, you know, leadership may be 100% committed. Your top of the organization's committed. You know, you've got your frontline staff or what have you committed to, you know, we really want to make change. But if the leadership's not hearing from the voices, the leadership has to understand where are the barriers that exist? What barriers are in place that I'm not able to hear from my racialized employees? Because a lot of the times it's that, you know, one side is on par with the other, but what are the systemic issues that are taking place that's preventing that information, that ability to listen and really address some of these difficult, challenging issues we see today from happening and from action actually happening. So and when we look at it from a bigger systems, I mean, society, similar thing, right? What is preventing from actual action taking place within all of our systems?
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you. So we are just watching the time here. I think the next question is kind of, I guess, when you excuse me, when you work in a diversity area, you know, sometimes I think I remember a number of experiences I've had personally, and I think that sometimes you think, you know, your feelings and your perspective might be ahead or a bit different from your organizations in terms of, you know, what does it mean on the ground? And so the sort of the final question would be, does diversity in the workplace mean the same thing to you as a personal, as a Black consultant? Does it mean the same thing to you as you think it means to people that you consult with? Or Ali, does it mean the same thing to you as you think that TD Canada Trust understands it? And the same thing with Karen. Are you guys aligned in terms of your perspective on what it means?
I'll start. So, you know, I think when we look at the work we're doing and what our purpose is and the why, you know, that's different to everybody. And when you look at EDI work, anti-racism work, there's an individual human component to it. And I think it's really understanding that everybody enters an organization, an environment with individual needs and maybe in individual expectations. But at the end of the day, everyone wants to be treated equally and equitably, but that means different things to different people. And I think once organizations understand that, because a lot of times we get this, you know, when we think of policies, I'm a policy nerd here. So, you know, I look at policies and I think, you know, there's this overarching umbrella that one size fits all, and there's the individual aspect that's left out. And I mean, and for our policies, we like to keep them broad, but when you're dealing with equality and equity, you know, you have to kind of be a little bit focused on the individual needs to understand that everyone comes into an environment expecting something different. But that doesn't mean that it should be seen as less than or not be given the same priority or the same importance. So I guess to, you know, quick answer is, you know, it means different things to everybody. And when I go into a company, I have to understand, okay, well, what are the needs of everybody, and looking at things from an individual perspective, but then that's making the whole culture better. If an employee can go into work, feel like they can be themselves, whatever that means. So you spend so much time at work, right? You know, they should be able to be their authentic self, and the culture of that environment should be welcoming to that. So, but that means different things to different people. And I think that's key with this.
Great, thank you. Alicia?
I would say that's exactly where I was going, is that there is different experiences that as companies, large or small, we need to acknowledge. As we intersect as, you know, just humans with our peers, our friends in the community, we need to recognize that those experiences have spectrum. So not every Black individual is going to view, you know, what's happening with the reinsurgence of Black Lives Matter the same. There's going to be different spectrums. Not every, you know, Indigenous or every woman is going to view everything the same. And that's really where I think organizations, to Colleen's point, that's where the understanding needs to come in, and creating equitable policies that factor in you meeting everyone in a different place, but creating that space where uniquely I can be myself, that my capabilities, my experiences will be rewarded, and I'm safe here. That's to me the biggest piece, and the opportunity that we have in 2020 and 2021 is now everyone's starting to understand through you know, society and through the dialogues that we're having in all of these different social circles, even outside of the workplace, is that there is a spectrum. And as allies, as peers, as members of, you know, racialized communities, it's even recognizing those spectrums amongst ourselves and acknowledging them, knowing that they're not yours to own. So you don't, you know, empathizing and understanding, not, you know, having to rationalize, but hearing people when they're sharing with you, and really valuing that sharing, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot in these types of racialized communities to come forward and to use your voice, because it's been suppressed for so long. So when you have anyone, a colleague, a friend, a peer, sharing with you, this is my experience and I'm seeing it this way, that is where, again, you need to lean in and listen, recognize that you may not see it the same way. Colleen's experiences, Carl, your experience, fundamentally, as members of the Black community, we all have very different ones, but I acknowledge them and I try to understand them and make meaning of them, and really own your action and your intent, and making sure that your intent matches to all of the pieces we were talking about today, the accountability that you will drive as a business owner, and making sure your intent matches those steps forward, and again, being accountable and being honest when it doesn't, and that's okay, but having that jump off point to, again, create that systemic change.
Good, thank you. Karen, you have the last word before I move back to Ian.
Sure. Yeah, I think the only other thing I would add is that I think it's very important to have a consistent narrative in terms of what you're trying to achieve within the organization. I think diversity and inclusion does mean different things to different people. And I think your whole workplace needs to know what you're trying to achieve, why you're prioritizing this work, and they need to see how they fit into this work and how they will benefit from this work. So a consistent narrative is important, but definitely I think in terms of people's experience, particularly when we think about intersectionality, you know, the experience that I have as a white woman may be different than the experience that an Indigenous woman has or a Black woman has. And most certainly it is, because, you know, there are compounding effects with the intersection of gender and color, race, So you have to recognize that and recognize the disadvantages that come with intersectional dimensions of diversity, and not forget about that when you're planning your strategy and your actions, and thinking of people as individuals, but really understanding how nuanced it can be. Having said that, I think, it's really just important to make whatever small changes you can start to make, because I think Colleen mentioned it earlier, those small changes can have a cumulative large impact, and those small changes really start to impact your culture and your microenvironment. So start wherever you are at, just start and prioritize this work. There's great value in doing it.
Thank you very much, Karen. Ian, do we have any questions in the chat box?
Yeah, just before I wrap up, there was a couple of questions, and you covered off through the course of your discussion. So thank you, a great discussion. Thanks to Elisha, Colleen, and Karen, and to you, Carl. One question that has come up, and this is something that, as the committee that Carl chairs for the chamber, a couple of questions around. We've talked about cultural diversity today and those issues, but people with disabilities is another whole area. And so maybe just quickly, we only got a couple of minutes left, but maybe talk about that, because that'll be another subject for another day, but it's an important one. We've got a series of things that we've identified through the work of the committee that Carl chairs. Maybe that would be the one. If people with disabilities, barriers to employment, maybe take a crack at connecting the whole question of inclusion just on that aspect, because there were several people that were watching that have that lens looking at it. So maybe I'll start with Colleen.
Okay, so when we think about individuals with abilities, disabilities, I don't think, let me think about this for a second. At the end of the day, everybody needs to feel like they're included, that they are welcomed, they feel a sense of belonging. So if an individual, a business owner who does have a disability, that does not mean that they should not be included to the space, and they should not feel like the space is not safe for them. And I feel like there are deep systemic issues at play that really further marginalize than include. And again, it comes back to that having purpose, having that intent. If you want to achieve full equity, then the outreach needs to be happening instead of the expectation that they're going to come, this racialized group, this marginalized group is going to come knocking down the door, because for so long their voices have been silenced. They haven't been included in part of the conversations addressing some of these issues. So, there's a lot of outreach that needs to happen, and it has to come from a place of intent and a place of trying to achieve equity. And regardless of what the disability is, the marginalization is, that they're valued. And if anybody who is a business owner, and I mean, in this day and age, there are the visible disabilities and there's the invisible, right? So this could be anybody we're talking about. And the point is, we need to make sure that there's a place where they feel like they belong, and there's a safe space, but also the outreach. Because if you're not reaching out to me, I'm not going to feel like I belong in that space. And I think that's key with addressing the disability aspect.
Okay, Karen?
Yeah, I think I would also add that, persons with disabilities are such an underemployed demographic in Canada, and so it's really an untapped resource if you're looking for great talent. And I think small business owners may shy away from employing persons with disabilities because they may think it's costly to make workplace accommodations to ensure that they can do their job to the fullest. But first of all, with working remotely and working from home, there may not be any accommodations whatsoever you need to do. But workplace accommodations are far less costly than you think. I think I heard a stat not too long ago that on average a workplace accommodation will cost $300 or $500, less than that one time for accommodation for a person with disabilities. So it's a no-brainer. It's an investment that you should make because you'll tap into a great resource, great talent, and I think not just thinking about your current workforce, but when you think about your services and your products for customers, designing those products and services inclusively will help you, get a greater market share. So, I'll give you an example of the iPhone. I think Siri was created initially to be an accommodation for persons with disabilities. And when you design things inclusively and when you make adaptations, it's good for everybody. So when you put that lens over your product design and services, it's good for your business.
Last couple of words to you, Alicia.
Yeah, and I think both of my peers on this panel have articulated it correctly, and I share the same view in that it's really kind of to Karen's previous question that she answered around the intersectionalities, and to Colleen really speaking to, really carving out and understanding that this isn't something that you need to treat differently. All of the things that we've talked throughout this call are equalities that every employee, every human is looking for as they kind of go out into the world and become vulnerable the moment they leave their home. Everyone is looking for this unified experience. And as business owners, again, big or small, that is our responsibility to be able to deliver that. And to not create that segmentation of, to Karen's point, having that narrative that it might be more expensive, or, those great examples of Apple. Like when you start to embed this inclusionary mindset into your framework and treat it almost like a governance model, like it's embedded within every piece of your life and the way you interact with your community, your customers, that will create those safe spaces. But it's really, to Colleen's point, not looking at these marginalized communities to also be the bearer of the answers. So it's really standing tall as leaders within the organization to do that work, to pull your communities and the representation within your business for clarity and to dig deeper, but to also not look for them to provide the answers, and to Colleen's point, be the ones coming forward and saying, I need X, Y, and Z to change. Because if you recognize, like, if you haven't created that space, they won't. So there is a certain level of work that you do need to do. But again, I don't think it's exclusive to one experience for individuals with disabilities, visible or not, and one experience for Black employees or customers. It's really around how do you recognize the intersectionality and how do you create and foster this environment of inclusion within every aspect or intersection of your business.
All right, that is fantastic. We're out of time for today. Just before we conclude, I want to thank our title sponsor for the series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and today's speakers, Alicia, Karen, and Colleen, and Carl for doing such a great job in moderating. And finally, to all of you for watching us today, as a reminder, we host a new business success series every Wednesday at 1 p.m., but we'll be taking a holiday break. We will pick back up on Wednesday, January 20th with a session from the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. We hope to see you then. For full details and to register, please visit greaterkwchamber.com. We hope you'll join us next time, because if it's Wednesday, it's the Business Success Series. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Alicia.
Great.
And thanks, Ian.
Thank you, everyone.